My name is Emily Parker, and the moment that shattered my parents' certainty happened on a warm May afternoon in Indiana. I was standing on the stage at Indiana State University dressed in a black graduation gown, listening to hundreds of people applaud. My mother suddenly grabbed my father's arm so tightly that his face twisted in surprise. Neither of them was looking at my sister. They were staring at me, the daughter they had written off, the daughter they had refused to invest in, the daughter my father had once looked straight in the eye and told, "You don't have potential." I watched his face drain of color as the dean announced my name for the third time that afternoon. Academic Excellence Award, Outstanding Leadership Recognition, Top Graduate in the School of Business. My father's mouth opened slightly. My mother's eyes filled with tears, and then I heard her whisper words I never thought I would hear. "Harold, what did we do?" For a moment I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. But to understand why that moment mattered, you have to go back 4 years. Back to the night my parents decided my future wasn't worth paying for. Back to the night they chose my sister over me. Back to the night I learned exactly how little they believed in me. I grew up in a small town outside Terre Haute, Indiana. It was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody else's business. People attended the same churches for decades, shopped at the same grocery stores, and spent Friday nights watching high school football games. My father, Harold Parker, worked maintenance at a manufacturing plant. My mother, Diane, was a receptionist at a dental office. We weren't poor, but money was always tight. Every purchase required discussion. Every vacation was carefully planned. Every unexpected expense became a family crisis. Then there was my younger sister, Claire. Claire was beautiful, outgoing, and naturally confident. Teachers loved her. Neighbors praised her. Relatives bragged about her. She walked into a room and people noticed. I was different. Quiet. Serious. Hardworking. The kind of girl who sat in the front row and took notes. The kind of girl who spent Saturday evenings studying instead of attending parties. For most of my childhood, I didn't think much about the differences. Then high school happened. That's when the comparisons started. Claire is such a natural leader. Claire has such a bright future. Claire is going places. At first, those comments didn't bother me. Until I realized nobody said those things about me. When report cards arrived, my parents celebrated Claire's accomplishments with enthusiasm. When mine arrived, they barely glanced at them, even though my grades were often better. I remember one evening during my junior year, I had just received news that I earned first place in a statewide business competition. I rushed home excited to share it. Mom was helping Claire prepare for a cheerleading event. Dad was watching television. Guess what I said? Neither looked up. I won the state competition. "That's nice, honey," Mom replied. Then she immediately turned back to Claire. 10 minutes later, Claire mentioned being nominated for homecoming court. The entire house exploded with excitement. Dad opened a bottle of sparkling cider. Mom called relatives. Photos were taken. Celebrations happened. Nobody mentioned my competition again. That was the first time I understood something painful. In my family, effort didn't matter. Attention did. And Claire always had it. By senior year, both of us were applying to colleges. To everyone's surprise, we were accepted into the same university, Indiana State. It wasn't an Ivy League school. It wasn't famous, but it was affordable and respected. Most importantly, both of us dreamed about attending. I still remember opening my acceptance letter. I cried. Not because I doubted I could get in, because I thought maybe this would finally be my chance. Maybe college would be the fresh start I needed. Maybe my parents would finally see me differently. For a few weeks, everything seemed hopeful. Then reality arrived. The financial aid packages came, and they weren't enough. One evening in early spring, my parents called a family meeting. The 4 of us sat around our kitchen table. The atmosphere felt heavy. Dad cleared his throat. Mom looked uncomfortable. Immediately, I knew something was wrong. "We need to discuss college finances," Dad said. Claire and I exchanged nervous glances. Dad explained that years of medical bills and financial setbacks had reduced their savings. They couldn't fully support both daughters. I understood that. Life happens. Money gets tight. What happened next was what broke me. Dad looked directly at Claire. "We want to help you finish school without debt." Claire smiled. Then he turned toward me. His expression changed. It became colder, more distant. "Emily, you'll have to figure things out on your own." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" "We can only afford one." The room became silent. I looked at Mom. She avoided eye contact. I looked back at Dad. "Why her?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. Dad sighed heavily. Then he said words that would follow me for years. Because Claire has more potential. I felt my stomach drop. What? He folded his arms. She's more outgoing, more ambitious. People connect with her. Then came the sentence that changed everything. You don't have the same potential she does. The words hit harder than any slap could have. I waited for Mom to disagree. She didn't. I waited for Claire to say something. She didn't. Nobody defended me. Nobody corrected him. Nobody told him he was wrong. The silence was its own answer. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to cry. Not in front of them. Not after hearing that. I stood up slowly. Okay, Mom finally spoke. Emily? No. I grabbed my acceptance letter from the counter. If that's what you believe, okay. Then I walked upstairs. I closed my bedroom door. And for the first time in my life, I cried until I couldn't breathe. That night, something inside me changed. Not because I suddenly became stronger. Because I realized nobody was coming to save me. Nobody was going to fight for me. Nobody was going to believe in me. I would have to do that myself. The next morning, while the rest of my family acted as though nothing had happened, I sat at my desk and began searching for scholarships. Then student loans. Then part-time jobs. Then work-study programs. If my parents had decided I wasn't worth investing in, I would become my own investor. I didn't know how difficult the next 4 years would be. I didn't know how many nights I would spend exhausted, scared, and alone. I didn't know how many times I would question whether I could continue. But I knew one thing. Someday, somehow, my parents would see what they had missed. And when that day came, I wouldn't need revenge. The truth would be enough. The next 4 months passed in a blur of applications, deadlines, and uncertainty. While Claire spent her summer shopping for dorm decorations and attending orientation events with Mom, I sat in the public library filling out scholarship forms. Every morning I woke up before sunrise. Every evening I went to bed wondering whether I could actually afford college. Some scholarships rejected me. Others never responded. A few awarded small amounts. $50 here. $500 there. Nothing life-changing. But I accepted every penny with gratitude. By August, I had pieced together enough financial aid, student loans, and savings from a summer job to begin my freshman year. Barely. The day we moved into campus remains one of the most painful memories of my life. Not because of college. Because of the difference between how my parents treated their 2 daughters. Claire moved into a newly renovated dormitory on the north side of campus. My parents bought her a mini refrigerator, new bedding, a laptop, decorative lights, and enough supplies to stock a small apartment. Mom cried while helping arrange her room. Dad carried boxes with a smile on his face. Photos were taken from every angle. It looked like a magazine advertisement for the perfect college send-off. My situation was different. I lived in an aging off-campus apartment with 3 other girls because it was cheaper. The building was old. The carpet smelled strange. The kitchen appliances looked older than I was. My bedroom was barely large enough for a twin bed and a desk. Dad dropped off 1 box. Mom gave me a quick hug. 20 minutes later, they left. I watched their car disappear down the street. Then I carried the rest of my belongings upstairs alone. That was my introduction to adulthood. Not celebration, not support, survival. The first semester nearly broke me. Classes started at 8 in the morning. My work-study job at the library lasted until early afternoon. Then I attended more classes. 3 evenings each week I worked at a diner near campus. Friday and Saturday nights I stocked shelves at a grocery store. Most weeks I worked between 25 and 30 hours. Sometimes more. I quickly learned that exhaustion becomes a permanent companion when you're trying to do everything at once. I studied during lunch breaks. I reviewed notes while riding the bus. I completed assignments after midnight. Sleep became a luxury. Meanwhile, Claire seemed to be living the college experience everyone imagined. At least according to social media. Photos of football games, sorority mixers, weekend trips, group dinners, campus events. Whenever Mom called, she talked endlessly about Claire's activities. Claire met so many wonderful people. Claire's professors love her. Claire is having the time of her life. Occasionally, Mom would ask how I was doing. But the question felt more like an obligation than genuine interest. One evening during my sophomore year, I answered a call while wiping tables at the diner. "How's school?" Mom asked. Before I could answer, she launched into a 15-minute update about Claire. A new boyfriend. A leadership position in her sorority. Plans for spring break. When she finally paused, I quietly said, "I made the dean's list again." "Oh, that's nice." Then she changed the subject. I stood there holding the phone after we hung up. The diner buzzed with conversations around me. Customers laughed. Dishes clattered. Country music played softly overhead. Yet I had never felt more alone. It wasn't the lack of money that hurt most. It was the feeling of being invisible. By the middle of sophomore year, things became even harder. Tuition increased. Rent increased. Everything seemed to cost more. My student loans were growing faster than I liked. Then disaster struck. One icy January morning, I slipped on a patch of black ice while walking to work. The fall wasn't dramatic, but I injured my wrist badly enough to require treatment. The medical bills weren't enormous. Still, they were more than I could comfortably afford. For several weeks, I fell behind. Bills piled up. Stress multiplied. I started skipping meals to save money. Nothing severe. Just enough to stretch my budget. A sandwich instead of dinner. Coffee instead of breakfast. Eventually, even concentrating in class became difficult. One afternoon, I sat in a business lecture struggling to stay awake. After class, my professor approached me. His name was Dr. Robert Matthews, a retired executive who taught part-time. Gray-haired. Calm. The kind of man who seemed to notice everything. "You look exhausted," he said. I forced a smile. "I'm fine." He didn't believe me. "Walk with me." We crossed campus slowly. At first, I answered his questions with vague responses. Then something unexpected happened. I told him the truth. Not all of it. Just enough. Working multiple jobs. Financial pressure. Constant exhaustion. Trying to stay afloat. He listened quietly. When I finished, he nodded. "You remind me of someone." "Who?" "Myself." That surprised me. Dr. Matthews had enjoyed a successful corporate career. People respected him. Students admired him. He didn't seem like someone who had struggled. He laughed softly. "Most people only see the ending." That conversation changed everything. Over the following months, he became an unofficial mentor. Nothing dramatic. No magical solutions. No checks appearing in the mail. Instead, he gave me something more valuable. Perspective. Confidence. Guidance. He challenged me to think bigger. To stop defining myself through my parents' opinions. To stop measuring my worth through their approval. One afternoon, he asked a question I couldn't answer. "What if they're wrong?" I frowned. "About what?" "You." The question lingered in my mind for weeks. What if they were wrong? What if my father's judgment wasn't fact? What if the limitations he saw existed only in his imagination? The idea felt almost dangerous. For years, I had accepted my family's view of me. The quiet daughter. The ordinary daughter. The backup daughter. But slowly, a different possibility emerged. Maybe I wasn't less capable. Maybe I had simply been overlooked. As junior year approached, my grades remained strong despite everything. Professors noticed. Classmates respected me. Employers trusted me. The world outside my family seemed to view me very differently than my parents did. For the first time in my life, I began wondering whether I should trust those outside opinions more. Then during the first month of junior year, Dr. Matthews called me into his office. He handed me a brochure, a prestigious business internship. Highly competitive. Nationally recognized. Hundreds of applicants. Only a handful selected. I laughed immediately. They'd never pick me. Dr. Matthews leaned back in his chair. "Why not?" I opened my mouth. Then stopped. Because every answer sounded suspiciously familiar. Too quiet. Not special enough. Not enough potential. The same things I'd heard for years. Dr. Matthews smiled knowingly. "Apply anyway." I looked down at the brochure. Something about it frightened me. Not because I thought I would fail. Because part of me was beginning to suspect I might succeed. And if I did, everything I believed about myself would have to change. The brochure sat on my desk for 3 days before I touched it again. Every time I looked at it, I heard my father's voice. "Claire has potential." "You don't." It was amazing how a single sentence could live inside a person for years. I was 20 years old by then, maintaining a strong GPA, working multiple jobs, paying my own bills, surviving challenges most students never faced. Yet one part of me still believed the man who had dismissed me at 18. Eventually, I forced myself to open the application packet. The internship was sponsored by a regional investment and business consulting firm headquartered in Indianapolis. They recruited students from universities across several states. The selected interns would work directly with executives, participate in leadership training, and receive generous compensation. It sounded like something meant for exceptional people. Not people like me. At least that's what I told myself. When I showed the brochure to one of my roommates, she nearly spilled her coffee. "Emily, this is huge." "I know." "So apply." I shrugged. "Hundreds of students will apply." She stared at me. "And I probably won't get it." My roommate laughed. You know what's funny? What? Every person I've ever met who says they're probably going to fail usually doesn't work nearly as hard as you do. Her words stayed with me. A week later, I submitted my application. Then I forgot about it, or at least I tried to. Life remained busy. Classes, work, assignments, bills, the usual cycle. Meanwhile, family life continued exactly as it always had. Every phone conversation revolved around Claire. She had changed majors again. That made 3 times in less than 2 years. First education, then communications, now marketing. Each change cost money and delayed her graduation plan. My parents never complained. Instead, they praised her for finding herself. I often wondered what would have happened if I had changed majors repeatedly while depending on their support. I already knew the answer. The rules were different for Claire. One Sunday afternoon, Mom called while I was studying in the library. You should hear about Claire's latest project. For the next 20 minutes, I listened politely. When she finally paused, I mentioned that I had just completed a major research presentation. Oh, that was her entire response. Just one word. Then she returned to discussing Claire. After we hung up, I sat quietly for several minutes. Strangely, I wasn't angry anymore. A few years earlier, that conversation would have devastated me. Now it simply confirmed something I already understood. I couldn't build my self-worth on people who refused to see me. 2 months later, an email arrived. I nearly deleted it by accident. The subject line caught my attention. Internship Selection Committee. My hands started shaking before I even opened it. I expected a rejection. Instead, I found an invitation to the final interview round. I read the email 3 times, then 5 times, then 10. The next morning, I showed it to Dr. Matthews. His smile told me he wasn't surprised. I knew you'd make it this far. I didn't. That's because you're still listening to the wrong voices. The interview took place in Indianapolis. I borrowed a professional outfit from a friend because I couldn't afford a new one. Then I drove 2 hours in my aging Honda Civic praying it wouldn't break down. The conference room intimidated me immediately. The other candidates looked polished and confident. Some came from wealthy families. Others attended prestigious schools. I felt completely out of place. For a few minutes, old fears returned. Then something unexpected happened. The interviewers started asking questions. Questions about leadership, problem-solving, perseverance, work ethic, real-life challenges. For the first time, I realized something important. My struggles had prepared me. While some candidates spoke about hypothetical situations, I talked about balancing work, school, financial hardship, and responsibility. Everything I had survived became an advantage. When the interview ended, one executive walked me to the door. "You've had an interesting journey," he said. I smiled politely. You could say that. A week later, I received another email. This time I cried. Not from sadness, not from relief, from disbelief. I had been selected, out of hundreds of applicants. I sat alone in my apartment staring at the screen. The words barely seemed real. For years I had been told I lacked potential. Now complete strangers were investing in me. People who owed me nothing. People who had evaluated me fairly. People who saw value where my own family never had. The internship changed my life. That summer I worked alongside business leaders whose experiences opened my eyes. I learned about investments, corporate strategy, entrepreneurship, leadership, professional networking. Most importantly, I learned confidence. Not the loud attention-seeking kind. The quiet confidence that comes from competence. The confidence built through preparation and persistence. For the first time, I began seeing myself differently. Not as the forgotten daughter. Not as the less impressive sister. Not as someone lacking potential. Simply as someone capable. One executive in particular became an important influence. His name was Michael Turner. He grew up in rural Ohio and paid his own way through college decades earlier. During lunch one afternoon, he shared part of his story. By the time he finished, I realized how many successful people had started with very little. The difference wasn't talent, it was resilience. That lesson became one of the most valuable gifts anyone ever gave me. When summer ended, I returned to campus with a stronger sense of purpose. My grades improved. My confidence improved. Even my posture changed. People noticed. Professors noticed. Classmates noticed. Everyone except my family. That Thanksgiving, I returned home for dinner. The dining room looked exactly as it always had. The same table, the same decorations, the same family photos. Yet something felt different. Maybe because I had changed. Throughout dinner, the conversation focused almost entirely on Claire. Her plans, her friends, her future. At one point, an aunt asked how school was going for me. Before I could answer, Mom interrupted. Emily's doing fine. Then she immediately redirected attention back to Claire. Nobody seemed to realize how strange that was. Or maybe they were simply used to it. Later that evening, I stood alone on the back porch watching snow fall across the yard. The cold air felt refreshing. Inside the house, laughter drifted through the windows. For years, moments like that had made me feel excluded. This time felt different. For the first time, I wasn't standing outside because they had pushed me there. I was standing outside because I no longer needed to be inside. The approval I had spent years chasing was losing its power over me. As I watched the snow cover the quiet neighborhood, I realized something that surprised me. My family didn't actually know me. Not anymore. Maybe they never truly had. They knew the version of me they had created. The quiet daughter. The ordinary daughter. The one with no potential. But the person I was becoming, the woman earning opportunities, building connections, and creating her own future, that woman was a stranger to them. And soon they were going to meet her. By the beginning of senior year, I had stopped expecting anything from my parents. That might sound sad, but it was actually liberating. When you stop waiting for someone to become the person you need them to be, you can finally focus on becoming the person you're meant to be. I still called home. I still visited during holidays. I still treated my parents with respect. But emotionally, something had shifted. I no longer measured my value through their approval. And that change made all the difference. The internship experience continued opening doors. Several executives stayed in contact with me. One of them, Michael Turner, occasionally checked on my progress. Another introduced me to professional networking opportunities. By senior year, I had developed relationships that many students wouldn't build until years after graduation. Every week seemed to bring a new opportunity. Meanwhile, my academic performance continued improving. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. I simply enjoyed learning. For the first time in my life, I trusted myself. That confidence showed up in unexpected ways. Class presentations no longer terrified me. Networking events became easier. Leadership positions felt natural. Even professors who had once known me as the quiet student began treating me differently. One afternoon, Dr. Matthews smiled after a presentation. "You know what's interesting?" "What?" "You finally look like the person you've been all along." I laughed. "What does that mean?" "It means you're no longer apologizing for taking up space." His words stayed with me. For years I had made myself smaller, quieter, less visible, not because that was my personality, because I had learned that attention belonged to Claire. Now I was discovering who I could become without those limits. Ironically, while my life was improving, Claire's seemed increasingly uncertain. She was still intelligent, still charming, still loved by everyone around her, but she struggled with direction. Every few months she seemed to discover a new passion, then lose interest, then move on to something else. By senior year, she was already behind schedule because of multiple major changes. My parents never expressed frustration. Instead, they continued rescuing her whenever problems appeared. Extra tuition, extra expenses, extra support. If Claire stumbled, someone immediately rushed to help. Part of me envied that. Not the money, the safety net. The certainty that somebody would catch you if you fell. I never had that, at least not from my family. One Saturday afternoon, Mom called while I was working on a project. "Your sister is thinking about changing her graduation plan." I wasn't surprised. "What happened?" "She's not sure marketing is the right fit." I rubbed my forehead. "Again." Mom laughed. "She's exploring her options." I nearly smiled. If I had delayed graduation because I couldn't decide what I wanted, my parents would have called me irresponsible. With Claire, it was self-discovery. The double standard no longer shocked me. It simply revealed itself more clearly every year. A few weeks later, I received an email that changed everything. At first, I thought it was spam. Then I noticed the company name, one of the largest business consulting firms in the Midwest. I opened the message. Read it once, then twice, then 3 times. They were offering me a position after graduation. A real position. A real salary, benefits, career advancement opportunities, everything I had spent years working toward. I sat motionless at my desk. The offer felt surreal, not because I doubted my qualifications anymore, because I remembered where I had started. The girl sitting alone in her bedroom while her father explained why she wasn't worth investing in. The girl working late shifts at the diner. The girl skipping meals to stretch her budget. The girl who spent years hearing she lacked potential. That girl now had a future she had built herself. I accepted the offer 2 days later. Then I called Dr. Matthews. His response made me laugh. "It's about time. You knew. I knew someone would hire you." His confidence in me never seemed to waver, even when mine did. After we hung up, I considered calling my parents. For a few minutes, I stared at my phone. Then I put it away, not out of anger, because I already knew how the conversation would go. Mom would say, "That's nice." Dad would ask a few questions. Then somehow the discussion would return to Claire. The thought no longer hurt. It simply felt predictable. So I celebrated with friends instead. People who genuinely cared. People who knew how hard I had worked. People who had watched the journey. Sometimes family isn't defined by blood. Sometimes it's defined by who shows up. Thanksgiving arrived a few weeks later. The house looked exactly the same. The familiar smell of turkey filled the air. Football played on television. Relatives drifted through the living room. Everything appeared normal, yet underneath the surface cracks were beginning to show. Claire seemed stressed. More than usual. Throughout dinner, she barely touched her food. Eventually, one of our uncles asked about her plans after graduation. The room became quiet. Claire hesitated, then admitted she wasn't sure. No job offers yet. No clear direction. No concrete plan. An uncomfortable silence followed. For the first time, I noticed something unusual. My parents looked worried. Not supportive. Not confident. Worried. The realization startled me. For years, they had spoken about Claire's future as though success were guaranteed. Now reality was becoming more complicated. Potential alone wasn't enough. At some point, results mattered. Later that evening, Dad and I found ourselves alone in the garage. He was organizing tools. I was looking for an extension cord. The silence felt awkward. Finally, he spoke. "How's school?" The question surprised me. "Good. Senior year now." "Yeah," he nodded. Time goes fast. Part of me wanted to tell him everything. The internship. The job offer. The awards. The opportunities. Instead, I simply said, "It does." Neither of us knew how to bridge the distance between us. Years of favoritism had built walls neither of us understood how to dismantle. After a few minutes, he returned to his tools, and I returned to the house. That brief conversation stayed with me. For the first time, Dad hadn't sounded dismissive. He sounded uncertain, almost reflective, as if he were beginning to realize how much time had passed, and how little he knew about the daughter standing in front of him. The spring semester arrived quickly. Final projects. Capstone courses, graduation preparations, everything accelerated. Then award nominations began. Professors encouraged me to apply for several university honors. I submitted the paperwork without expecting much. After all, hundreds of talented students were graduating. Then the notifications started arriving. One award, then another, then another. Each recognition felt meaningful, not because of the title, because each one represented years of invisible effort. Years nobody had celebrated. Years nobody had noticed, except now people were noticing. And in a few short months, my parents would be sitting in the audience. For the first time in 4 years, they would see the complete picture. Not the version of me they imagined. The version I had become. Graduation day arrived beneath a bright Indiana sky. The kind of spring morning that feels full of possibility. Families filled the campus walkways. Parents carried cameras. Grandparents adjusted folding chairs. Students in black gowns hurried between buildings, laughing, posing for photographs, and trying to hide their nerves. I woke up before sunrise. Not because I had to, because I couldn't sleep. 4 years. 4 long years. Every late-night shift. Every scholarship application. Every missed party. Every lonely dinner. Every moment of doubt. Everything had led to this day. I stood in front of the mirror in my apartment and adjusted my graduation gown. For a moment, I barely recognized the woman looking back at me. The nervous 18-year-old who had arrived with one box of belongings seemed very far away. She still existed somewhere inside me, but she no longer defined me. My phone buzzed. A text message from Dr. Matthews. "Proud of you, see you soon." A few seconds later, another message arrived. "Michael Turner. Big day, congratulations." Then another, and another. Friends, professors, mentors, people who had become part of my journey. The support overwhelmed me, not because I wasn't grateful, because I wasn't used to it. For most of my life, achievements had happened quietly. Today felt different. By mid-morning, the campus was buzzing with excitement. Students gathered outside the auditorium. Faculty members moved through the crowd. Families searched for seats. As I walked across campus, several professors stopped to congratulate me. One shook my hand. Another gave me a quick hug. A third joked that she expected me to come back one day and teach a class. Each interaction filled me with gratitude. But it also reminded me of something painful. Strangers had believed in me more than my own family ever had. Eventually, I spotted my parents. They had just arrived. Mom wore a blue dress. Dad wore a suit that looked slightly uncomfortable on him. Claire stood beside them. For a moment, everything felt normal, like every family graduation photo I'd ever seen. Then I noticed something. My parents looked relaxed, confident, almost excited. And I knew exactly why. They still expected this day to be about Claire. After all, it always had been. I walked over and greeted them. Mom hugged me. Dad shook my hand awkwardly before pulling me into a brief embrace. Claire smiled. "You ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be." Mom immediately turned toward Claire. "You look beautiful." Claire laughed. Dad adjusted Claire's graduation hood. Mom brushed a wrinkle from her gown. I stood there quietly, watching. Not hurt, not angry, just aware. Some habits never fully disappear. Soon, students were directed toward the staging area. As I walked away, I glanced back once. My family was still gathered around Claire. Nobody noticed me leave. The ceremony began shortly afterward. Thousands of people filled the auditorium. Graduates lined the floor. Families packed the seats. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation. The first hour passed normally. Speeches, introductions, awards, recognition ceremonies. Then things started becoming interesting. The dean stepped to the podium. "We would now like to recognize several graduating students whose academic achievements have distinguished them among this year's class." My heart started beating faster. I knew some awards were being announced. I just didn't know which students had been selected. The dean began reading names. Applause followed each one. Then I heard mine. Emily Parker. For a second, everything seemed to stop. Applause echoed through the auditorium. I stood and walked toward the stage. The audience applauded politely. I accepted the award, shook hands, returned to my seat. Simple, professional, meaningful. As I sat down, I glanced toward the audience. My parents looked surprised, not shocked, just surprised, as though they hadn't expected to hear my name. The ceremony continued. A few minutes later, another presenter approached the podium. This time it was a leadership award. Again, names were announced. Again, applause followed. Then my name echoed through the auditorium for a second time. Emily Parker. The reaction around me changed. Students turned. Professors smiled. Several classmates congratulated me as I walked forward. This time when I looked toward my parents, their expressions were different. Dad was sitting straighter. Mom looked confused. The realization was beginning. Small, subtle, but unmistakable. The daughter they had ignored was becoming impossible to ignore. Then came the final recognition. The major one. The award I never expected to win. The university president himself stepped to the microphone. The room quieted immediately. This year's recipient has demonstrated extraordinary academic achievement, leadership, perseverance, and service. I felt my stomach tighten. The description sounded familiar, but I didn't dare assume anything. The president continued speaking. He described internships, community involvement, academic excellence, professional accomplishments. With every sentence, my pulse accelerated. Then he smiled. "It is my honor to recognize this year's outstanding graduate from the School of Business." A brief pause. Then, Emily Parker. For a moment, the auditorium erupted. The applause was louder than before. Students stood. Faculty members cheered. Several professors rose to their feet. I felt frozen, almost disconnected from reality. The walk to the stage seemed endless. When I reached the podium, the president shook my hand warmly. Then something unexpected happened. He spoke directly into the microphone. "Emily's story is one of determination and resilience. She has earned every bit of this recognition." The applause grew even louder. I turned toward the audience, and that's when I saw them. My parents. Mom's eyes were filled with tears. Dad looked stunned. Completely stunned. Not proud. Not yet. First came disbelief, as if he were trying to reconcile two completely different realities. The daughter he remembered, and the woman standing before him. Then I noticed another group rising to their feet. Michael Turner. Several executives from my internship. Dr. Matthews. They were standing together, applauding, smiling. People my parents had never met. People who knew exactly who I was. People who had invested in me when my own family would not. I watched Mom turn toward Dad. Her hand reached for his arm. She gripped it tightly. Then she leaned closer. Even from the stage, I could read her lips. "Harold?" Dad didn't respond. His eyes never left me. Mom swallowed hard. Then came the words I had imagined 100 times over the years. Words I never truly believed I would hear. What did we do? The expression on my father's face changed. For the first time in my life, I saw regret. Not annoyance, not disappointment. Regret. Raw. Painful. Unavoidable. In that moment, the truth finally reached them. Not because I had argued. Not because I had demanded recognition. Not because I had sought revenge. Because reality had spoken for itself. The daughter they had dismissed. The daughter they had refused to support. The daughter they said lacked potential. Had succeeded anyway. And now they were being forced to confront something much harder than failure. They were confronting their mistake. As I stood on that stage holding the award, I expected triumph. Vindication. Maybe even satisfaction. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Sadness. Because no award could give back the years. No applause could erase those words. No recognition could change what had happened. But it could do one thing. It could make the truth impossible to deny. And judging by the look on my father's face, denial had finally ended. The applause eventually faded. The ceremony moved forward. Other students crossed the stage. More names were announced. More families celebrated. But for my parents, something had changed. I could see it every time I glanced toward the audience. They weren't watching the ceremony anymore. They were watching me, almost as if they were trying to understand who I had become, or perhaps who I had always been. When the final graduate received a diploma and the ceremony officially ended, hundreds of families poured into the campus courtyard. People laughed. Photographs were taken. Graduates embraced friends. Proud parents wiped away tears. The entire campus felt alive. I stepped outside into the sunshine and immediately found myself surrounded. Professors stopped to congratulate me. Classmates hugged me. Several faculty members introduced me to their families. Dr. Matthews arrived first. Without saying a word, he wrapped me in a hug. "I'm proud of you." Those 4 words nearly broke me. Because he meant them. No conditions. No comparisons. No qualifications. Just pride. A few minutes later, Michael Turner approached with several executives from the internship program. They shook my hand and congratulated me. One joked that they expected great things from me. Another reminded me that my first day of work was only a few weeks away. As we talked, I noticed my parents standing several yards away. Watching. Waiting. Uncertain. The sight felt strange. My father had always seemed so confident, so certain of his judgments, yet now he looked uncomfortable, almost nervous. Eventually, the crowd around me began to thin, and suddenly there was nowhere left for any of us to hide. My parents slowly approached. Claire walked beside them. Nobody spoke at first. The silence stretched. Then Mom stepped forward. Her eyes were red. She looked as though she had been crying. "Emily." I nodded. "Mom." She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "You were amazing today." The compliment felt sincere, but it arrived 4 years late. "Thank you." Dad stood quietly beside her, his hands shoved awkwardly into his pockets. For a man who always seemed to have answers, he suddenly appeared lost. Finally, he spoke. "I didn't know." I looked at him. "What didn't you know?" "Any of this." His voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. "The awards. The internship. The job offer." I wasn't surprised. "You never asked." The words weren't cruel. They were simply true. Dad looked down. Mom started crying again. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Dad inhaled deeply. And something happened that I never expected. My father apologized. Not halfway. Not indirectly. Not with excuses. An actual apology. "Emily, I was wrong." The words hung in the air. Heavy. Painful. Necessary. He swallowed hard. "I was very wrong." Part of me had imagined this moment for years. I had pictured anger. Confrontation. Vindication. Instead, I felt tired. Not physically. Emotionally. Because once the fantasy becomes reality, you realize an apology cannot erase history. Dad continued speaking. "When you were younger, I thought I understood both of my daughters." His voice cracked. "I thought I knew who would succeed. I thought I knew who needed help." He shook his head. I didn't. Mom reached for his hand. Tears continued rolling down her cheeks. "We failed you," she whispered. The courtyard around us seemed to disappear. All the noise. All the celebration. Everything faded. For the first time in years, my family was finally discussing the truth. I looked at both of them. Then I said something I had never fully admitted aloud. "Do you know what hurt the most?" Neither answered. "It wasn't the money." They looked surprised. I understood that money was tight. I paused. What hurt was hearing my own father tell me I didn't have potential. Dad closed his eyes, as if the memory physically hurt. I know. No, I said quietly. I don't think you do. The words came easier than I expected. Years of silence were finally breaking. I spent years believing something was wrong with me. Mom covered her mouth. I kept wondering why I wasn't enough, why my achievements didn't matter, why nobody seemed proud of me. The tears I had controlled all afternoon finally appeared. Not dramatic, just honest. I wasn't angry because you helped Claire. I was angry because you decided I wasn't worth helping. Nobody spoke. What could they say? The truth was sitting between us, and it wasn't comfortable. After a long silence, someone unexpected stepped forward. Claire. Throughout the conversation, she had remained unusually quiet. Now she looked directly at me, and for the first time in years I saw guilt in her eyes. I knew. I blinked. What? Claire swallowed. I knew they treated me differently. The confession shocked all of us, even Mom and Dad. Claire continued. Maybe not at first, but eventually I knew. Her voice trembled. I just didn't want to admit it. She wiped away tears. I liked being the favorite. The honesty stunned me. Then she said something none of us expected. And it hurt me too. Dad frowned. What do you mean? Claire laughed sadly. Because every time I failed, everyone made excuses. Every time I struggled, someone rescued me. She looked toward me. You learned how to survive. I learned how to depend on people. The statement landed heavily, because there was truth in it. A lot of truth. Favoritism hadn't only damaged me. It had damaged her too. Just differently. For years I had viewed Claire as the winner. The chosen child. The lucky one. Yet standing there, I realized she had been carrying her own burden. The pressure to justify everyone's expectations. The fear of disappointing people who constantly elevated her. The inability to develop independence because someone was always stepping in. Suddenly things seemed more complicated than I had believed. Not better. Just more complicated. Dad sat down on a nearby bench. The weight of everything appeared to settle on his shoulders. I thought I was helping. His voice barely rose above a whisper. I really did. Nobody argued. Because I believed him. The damage had been real. But so had the intention. That was what made family mistakes so painful. The people who hurt us are often the same people who love us. They simply love imperfectly. Mom eventually looked at me. What can we do? I considered the question carefully. For years I would have answered differently. Today my response surprised even me. You can start by getting to know me. Dad looked up. What? You don't know me. I smiled sadly. Not really. The statement wasn't an accusation. It was a fact. My parents knew the 18-year-old girl who left home. They didn't know the woman who stood before them. The woman who had built a life without their approval. The woman who had discovered her own worth. The woman they had underestimated. And for the first time I saw something in my father's eyes that had never been there before. Not judgment. Not comparison. Respect. Real respect. It was a beginning. Not a solution. Not forgiveness. Not healing. Just a beginning. But after 4 years, a beginning was enough. The weeks after graduation felt strangely quiet. For 4 years, my life had revolved around deadlines, work schedules, exams, and survival. Then suddenly it was over. No more lectures. No more late-night study sessions. No more racing from one job to another. For the first time in a very long time, I had room to breathe. I moved to Indianapolis and started my new position with the consulting firm. The transition was exciting and intimidating. Everything felt bigger. The city. The office. The responsibilities. But unlike the frightened 18-year-old who had left home years earlier, I trusted myself now. Not because I believed I would never fail. Because I knew I could recover if I did. That confidence changed everything. My first few months were demanding. Long hours. New challenges. Steep learning curves. Yet I loved every minute of it. Each project taught me something new. Each success reinforced a lesson I had learned long ago. Potential isn't something somebody else gives you. It's something you discover by showing up over and over, even when nobody is cheering for you. Meanwhile, things at home began changing too. Slowly. Awkwardly. But genuinely. About 3 weeks after graduation, Dad called. At first, I assumed he needed something. That had been the pattern for years. Instead, he simply wanted to talk. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. We discussed work, the city, my apartment, my coworkers. Nothing dramatic happened. Yet when I hung up, I realized something surprising. My father had spent an entire hour asking questions about me. Not Claire. Not anyone else. Me. A month later, Mom visited Indianapolis. Just the two of us. We walked through a farmer's market downtown. Had lunch together. Talked about things we had never discussed before. At one point, she became emotional. I missed so much. I knew exactly what she meant. Not birthdays. Not holidays. The smaller things. The details that build a relationship. The years when she could have known me better but didn't. I squeezed her hand. Neither of us had a perfect answer. Healing rarely arrives with a grand speech. Usually it happens through small moments repeated consistently. One conversation. Then another. Then another. Trust rebuilding itself piece by piece. The biggest surprise came from Claire. A few months after graduation, she called unexpectedly. We talked for nearly 2 hours. Not as rivals. Not as competitors. As sisters. Real sisters. For the first time, we discussed things honestly. The favoritism. The pressure. The resentment. The misunderstandings. Everything. Claire admitted something that stayed with me. When Dad called me the one with potential, I thought it was a compliment. She laughed sadly. It took me years to realize it was actually hurting both of us. I understood exactly what she meant. Being underestimated had wounded me. But being constantly placed on a pedestal had wounded her too. Neither role was healthy. Neither role was fair. Children aren't supposed to compete for love. They're supposed to receive it. By autumn, our relationship had improved more than I ever thought possible. Not perfect. Just real. And real was enough. The biggest transformation happened with Dad. For years, I viewed him as stubborn, certain, unmovable. Yet after graduation, he began confronting things about himself that he had avoided for decades. One evening during a phone call, he told me something unexpected. He had started attending counseling through a local community program. At first, I was speechless. My father came from a generation that rarely discussed emotions. The idea of him sitting in a counselor's office seemed almost impossible. I realized I needed help understanding why I did what I did, he said. The admission meant more to me than any apology, because it showed effort, growth, accountability. Months earlier, I would never have imagined hearing those words. Around Thanksgiving, my parents invited both daughters home. For the first time in years, I wasn't sure how to feel. Part of me worried old patterns would return. Part of me feared disappointment. But another part felt hopeful. When I arrived, something immediately felt different. Small things. Simple things. Yet meaningful. 2 framed graduation photos sat side by side on the mantel. One of Claire. One of me. Neither larger. Neither more prominent. Equal. Later, while setting the table, Mom asked about a recent project at work. Dad listened attentively. Claire discussed her own plans and career goals. Nobody interrupted. Nobody redirected attention. Nobody compared us. The difference was subtle, yet profound. As dinner progressed, laughter filled the room. Not forced laughter. Comfortable laughter. The kind families share when they stop trying to be perfect. At one point, I looked around the table and realized something. For years, I had imagined revenge as a moment. A victory. A reckoning. A scene where everyone finally understood how wrong they had been. And yes, graduation day had provided part of that. But sitting there that Thanksgiving, I discovered something better. Peace. Because revenge can prove a point. Peace can heal a life. The truth was, I no longer needed my parents to admit I had value. I already knew it. I no longer needed them to recognize my accomplishments. I had already built a future. I no longer needed their approval. Because somewhere along the way, I had learned to approve of myself. That was the real victory. Not the awards. Not the job. Not the applause. Freedom. Freedom from the belief that someone else's opinion determines your worth. As dessert was served, Dad raised his glass. The room grew quiet. He looked at Claire. Then at me. His eyes were shining. I made mistakes as a father. Nobody spoke. I spent years believing I could predict who my daughters would become. He shook his head. I was wrong. Then he smiled. The truth is, both of you became remarkable women. Mom wiped away tears. Claire smiled. And for the first time in many years, the compliment belonged to both of us. Not one daughter. Both daughters. Exactly as it should have been. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I stood alone on the back porch. Snow drifted softly across the yard, just as it had years earlier. The same house. The same town. The same stars overhead. Yet everything felt different. I thought about the frightened girl who had cried alone in her bedroom after hearing she had no potential. If I could speak to her now, I know exactly what I would say. I would tell her that other people's limitations are not her destiny. I would tell her that being overlooked does not mean being unworthy. I would tell her that resilience grows strongest in difficult soil. Most of all, I would tell her never to let someone else's judgment become her identity. Because sometimes the people who know us best still get us wrong. And sometimes the greatest act of courage is continuing to believe in yourself anyway. The day my father said I had no potential changed my life. But the day I stopped believing him changed my future. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to think about someone who may have been underestimated, overlooked, or unfairly judged. Sometimes a few words of encouragement can change the direction of a person's life. And if you've ever had to build your future without the support you deserved, remember this: your worth was never determined by the people who failed to see it. Thank you for spending this journey with me. If this story resonated with you, consider sharing it with someone who needs to hear it, and follow along for more stories about resilience, family forgiveness, and second chances.